Okay, as a resource person, Dr. Pallavi from Startup Oasis, CIIE, IIM Ahmedabad. She has done her PhD from Symbiosis International University. Dr. Pallavi specializes in sectoral and social incubation program designed for early stage entrepreneurs. She has designed and led outcome-oriented programs especially crafted for women, creatives, skilled edtech, and social entrepreneurs. She has supported over 375 enterprises through various program interventions. She headed DFID's Invent program that supported over 45 social enterprises from across the country. She leads Women Entrepreneurship Vertical with programs like Invest India's Wing and GIZ's projects. She leads MUFG's Skill Program for Skill Tech and EdTech Startup Policy for Indian youth. She works with university incubators and e-cells at various universities to build their entrepreneurship interventions at the campus. There are still so much things to talk about her. So we are blessed to have her as a resource person. So kindly welcome Dr. Pallavi to present her session.
Thank you, Aditya. That was an introduction in quite some detail. Okay. So good morning, everyone. And first of all, very glad to be here today and talking to you on this theme, which is startup ecosystem, which is at the center and the state levels. Before I get into the presentation mode and we start talking about how this looks like for us, how this looks like for startups, just a quick understanding on why are we attending this session today. Of course, it's an FDP, part of an FDP and overall program. But what is that we want to probably pick up from this session? What are the questions that are in a mind that you expect me to sort of cover in my word with you today? And if there is anything that you want to ask. So please feel free. I hope everyone is allowed to unmute themselves. Please feel free to unmute yourselves just to have a kind of an expectation setting as to what do you think this session should bring to you. And if there are any challenges, any questions that you have in mind that probably I can help you with whatever experience I have. So, yep. In case you want to comment here in the comment section, that's fine. In case you want to unmute yourselves and talk about it, again, glad. There are no questions. So there is no expectation. Yeah.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Ma'am, we would like to know about what are the various policies that are available for startups and how students can be benefited, like if they want to start something, exactly what are the areas that they should look for, or legal or maybe some regulatory policies that they are available. So that is one point, one of the expectation.
Okay.
Apart from that, what are the areas where a lot of startups are getting established in India? So which are the areas? So that all we would like to know, sir. No, ma'am.
When you say areas, these are sectors or these are regions, geographical regions?
Sectors, ma'am. Sectors.
Sectors.
Yes.
Okay.
So, but it can be related to geography also. So we would like to know if there is some geographical specialization or geographical inclination towards a particular sector. Yes, ma'am.
Sure. Great. Thanks. That was helpful. Anything else? My expectation here is that, or my assumption here is
Excuse
that.
me, ma'am.
Yep.
Excuse me,
Yeah, please go ahead.
Pallavi, ma'am.
Yeah,
Yes,
please go
I'm
ahead.
Dr. Priya Xavier. About the ecosystem in startups in India, can you just highlight what are the government initiatives? Are they encouraging startups right now? Because we have the Startup India initiative by government started already in the Modi regime. So is it going towards more encouragement of startups, or it is now saturated with startups?
Okay, interesting. Okay, what else?
That's all, ma'am. That's all.
Okay, okay, okay. Anyone else? Or maybe we quickly dive into what we had planned for today. Okay, you have heard what I do as a part of this incubator that's called Center for Innovation, Incubation and Entrepreneurship. Just a brief about that and setting the context here. So um, this incubator was established sometime in 2008 with the objective that there were a lot of IM alumni who wanted to opt for entrepreneurship as a career option. Of course, they had their loans on them, the repayment was there. So they had to be incentivized and sort of a subsistence given to them so that they could mitigate the risk to a certain extent, have their subsistence in place, not worry about the 2 meals of the day, etc., and focus on entrepreneurship endeavor. And that's where we started I Am Mavericks. So these were people who have done their post graduation, and now instead of taking placements immediately, they want to take a holiday of 1 year at least and work very closely with the incubator that was established, and then look at the options as to how this startup could be taken forward. They were given a stipend of around 30 to 50,000 per month, which would take care of their day-to-day expenses. And of course, once the pilot was done, once the prototype was done, once the MVP, which is the minimum viable product, stage could be achieved where it would be ready to go to market, then there would be network connects, market connects, investor connects, funding connect, etc. that would happen. So that's how it started off. And the second important objective of the incubator was to also understand what kind of landscape is there as far as entrepreneurship in general is concerned, whereas also specific sectors. So for example, civic tech. What are the various kinds of intervention that are happening in civic tech? Especially after the smart cities movement, what have the new initiatives looked like? Who are supporting them? What kind of support system they need, etc. So it was a landscape study for the whole ecosystem as such. And what is this ecosystem? We'll talk about that a little more in a while. So that was the primary objective. Gradually, we started escalating to doing national level programs in collaboration with government, semi-government bodies, international bodies, multilateral bodies, CSRs, etc. Of course, at that time, CSR was not that strong, and now CSR is relatively strong. We do programs with Omidya Network, we do programs with MUFG, with SAP, with others. Now the story aage is that once this was all done, and I think it was almost 7 years that passed, and I'm talking about the days when the ecosystem was not that mature, though Gujarat was relatively ahead of other states, but still not that matured. We started realizing that just having a body at the center, or just having programs that were very, very nation specific, would not take us a long way. We had to delve into problems, regions, especially tier 2, tier 3 cities at a very, very grassroots level. The idea was to support these enterprises and these entrepreneurs who were coming out of these regions. You must have heard Razorpay. Razorpay was born out of Jaipur, a very small incubator that was called Startup Oasis. They sat there for some time, and today we know where they are. They went to Vicom, and of course, it's a unicorn now. So that's how these small startups in small cities, in tier 2, tier 3 cities build up. So coming back, we realize that we have to have a regional aspect of the whole ecosystem development initiative. And that's where we had a regional body called CRIF. Startup Oasis is the brand name. CRIF is the regional entity of CII-Co that works only on the regional grassroots levels. Now, a parallel can be drawn. This FDP is funded by AIC. So you must have heard there are a lot of AICs that are there. Most of these AICs or incubators by AIM, they are on university campuses. So one part is AIC, the other part is ACIC. I don't know how many of you would know already about it. This is ATAL Community Innovation Centers. So while the government understands that there has to be something like AIC, wherein we can mobilize tier 1, tier 2, metros, tier 3 cities, all kinds of cities, there also needs to be an intervention that works at a very, very grassroots level for very, very grassroots innovations. And that's the reason ACICs are being introduced. Government plans to have, I think, another set of 25 more ACICs in the times to come, along with AIC. So it's going to be a balancing system between, what happens at a relatively top level and a relatively lower level. When I say lower level, it's relatively bottom of the pyramid, which means geographically, not economically, but also in terms of the mobility that's there on the startup ecosystem. These are less developed, very less developed, especially rural areas, and bringing up, innovations from there. So having this context that why even an organization like CII-Co felt the need sometime in 2014. This is when we got established. In 2015, 16, we started operations in Jaipur. And I give you this context so that you understand what was the relevance of having this regional piece along with the central piece. So the headquarters are still in Gujarat. But, having headquarters somewhere and not really looking at what that specific region might look like doesn't reach you anywhere, doesn't take you anywhere. And that's the reason today we have our existence not only in Rajasthan, but also in MP, in Assam, which doesn't mean that we will do programs only in these states, which means that we will do initiatives that will build the local ecosystem of those places. We'll talk about this more. Now, I'll quickly take this question. Are we really encouraging new startups? Is the government encouraging new startups? Absolutely. So government generally works when there is a market failure. So when we started off, say 10 years back, policy came at a central level much later. But say if we started off our work in terms of startup ecosystem building, say 10 years back, at that time, the maturity of the ecosystem was pretty low. Today, we hear about VCs, venture capitalists. We hear about angel networks. We hear about organizations like TIE, FICCI Flow, a lot of other organizations. We hear about incubators. We hear about AICs, ACICs. We hear about schemes and funding schemes, especially where that's called Nidhi, etc. But all this started off, it came with time. But 10 years ago, the market didn't look this bright, or the ecosystem didn't look that bright. So obviously the intervention of the government there was required much more. Fortunately, in the last whatever years, the ecosystem has graduated to the next level. And now, with government, there are a lot of bodies standing to support the startup ecosystem. So again, coming to the question, are we encouraging new startups? Absolutely. Now it's not just the government that's encouraging. or also directly and indirectly providing support to the incubators or anything to who have anything to do with startup ecosystem. It's also now incubators and funding agencies, international agencies, support agencies, non-government organizations that have now picked up to a vast extent. Look at the map that is in India as far as incubators are concerned. Each state, almost each district, at least tier 1 district would have a tier 1 city, would have one incubator. So absolutely new startups are being encouraged. Of course, with time, there is more competition to get funds, competition to capture the market, and competition to also stand tall given whatever situation we are in, because now there are more people, there is more awareness, there is more exposure, there is more access to resources and mentors and coaches and incubators, etc. So yes, competition is high, definitely high. And what we require probably in a startup is really innovation, some tech infusion, need to be doing something very, very meaningful, novel, and new and impactful, really, and scalable and investable. So if there is a startup that's doing all of this or most of it, they will find their place in terms of investment, in terms of startup support, in terms of incubation, acceleration, or market capture, or collaboration, etc. Now, are there specific geographies or sectors that are moving ahead? Yes, there are geographies. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's like a hub and spoke as far as the state and government is concerned, but leave that aside. We'll talk about it later. As far as geographies are concerned, of course, the very dear city, Bangalore, is called the Silicon Valley of the country. So that has now become a hub for any kind of a tech startup. Interestingly, it's not just a hub for tech startups, or rather why it's a hub for tech startups or any startup for that matter. One, they get access to IT and IT guys. They get a very, very ripe market. So whenever we're looking at market, whenever we are looking at piloting something, introducing something to the market, a startup would look at early adopters. Who would be the early adopters for a specific intervention? Say you want to do something in EdTech. So where do you get these early adopters from? So these early adopters are there in Bangalore and the region around because they're very tech savvy. You want to do an alpha or a beta launch of any kind of an app, that's a very ripe market. So one condition is that there is availability of resources, and it also has become very resourceful in the sense that there are more mentors related to that, there are more startups for cross collaboration and cross learning. Then the market is very ripe. So yes, there are certain cities or certain states also for that matter that are ahead. But more interesting is that now, especially after COVID times, when people went back home, and in fact, the trend started much before, there are other set of cities now that are coming up. For example, a city like Bhopal, a city like Jaipur, a city like Indore, or certain states, a state like Assam, you know. So these were relatively behind, but now these are the emerging places. I've just named a few. There are quite many now. Now these are emerging as the new startup capitals of the country. Now what has happened is Bangalore has become very difficult to absorb. It has become very difficult for, in fact, Bangalore to absorb so many people. And the attrition is very high because you just leave a job, you get another job. There are a lot of people who would apply for a job, but they wouldn't really care because they have other options. Secondly, the cost is pretty high. The real estate cost is pretty high. Of course, COVID has changed that a bit. That's the reason people are also coming back to smaller cities than Bangalore, like say Jaipur, Bhopal, etc., where the ecosystem is decent. It's emerging. It's not as matured as we would find in Bangalore, but it's pretty mature, and it's getting only better. So the cost is relatively low. The early adopters to a large extent can be found here also. And you also at times get a first mover advantage in a lot of ways. So there are certain regions which are definitely becoming hotbeds and fertile grounds for these enterprises and startups for whatever reasons. And the competition is relatively less. So say if there are 5 enterprises that are fighting for a Nidhi EIR grant, then Nidhi is a program which focuses on supporting enterprises through funds. So EIR is an entrepreneur in residence, and there are other couple of schemes that they have, seed funding, etc. So if in a smaller place, the probability of being able to get this, if you are better than the rest of the people, it really goes up. So there are a lot of intangible and tangible benefits that now the emerging startup capitals, which are really tier 1 or tier 2 cities, which have now a stable ecosystem, if not a very matured ecosystem, do have. So in terms of geographies and regions, that's what it is. So there are benefits of being in a city like a Bangalore or a Delhi. There are benefits of being in cities like a Jaipur or a Bhopal. And you really have to see which sector you come from, what kind of collaborations you want, what kind of logistics you want, what kind of VCs and angels you want, and accordingly be there, you know. The visibility, if you are in the emerging cities and the established cities as far as ecosystem is concerned, the eyeballs are on you. So you get visibility easier. But having said that, there are startups. I'll cite an example of a startup that's sitting in Kota in Rajasthan, which is a very, very backward ecosystem as far as others, not in absolute terms, but in relative terms. Now, there is this enterprise which is called MedCords. It started from that small city, and today it has reached a level which is commendable. So if you're doing good work, then probably the regions may not matter. As far as sectors are concerned, there are certain sectors which actually started emerging also because of COVID, like EdTech. There was a lot of tech infusion everywhere, be it on the market side, be it on the supply side, the back-end side. So definitely tech remains the hot favorite stream. This is not a sector, but this is anywhere if it's facilitated by something which is very innovative, something which is very tech oriented, tech heavy or tech light, which is deep tech or tech facilitated, doesn't matter. But that's any sector which has that is doing well. But yes, health is doing relatively well. Sustainability, because especially after COVID, everybody has started understanding that what you're wearing, what you're eating, what you're consuming in any way is very important from environment perspective, from social perspective, and from health perspective, individual perspective. So that has become really important. So health is one, edtech is one, sustainability is one. There are also livelihood sector which is now emerging, especially in the rural areas, because people would do a reverse migration because of COVID. We've all seen that, people moving back to the native places. And that has really encouraged the organizations sitting there, be it government or non-government, to look at this afresh. And that is probably also one reason why ACICs are now being pushed like never before, because these would typically work in rural areas. So any kind of a rural innovation, something that works on the livelihood enhancement of people, anything to do with education system, anything to do with health, anything to do with circular economy or sustainability, even agri, because that's directly, indirectly related to health. One area, again, that's very emerging, which is not a startup, is small and medium enterprises. We've seen how small and medium enterprises would burn less. When I say burn, this is a typical term that we use as to how much expenses that a startup does or an enterprise does in a stipulated time period. So when it's an MSME, or let's forget about micro, the small and medium enterprises, they're usually not funded. They are bootstrapped. They take care of their expenses. So because it's not a funder there, and it's not very cost heavy or expense heavy, so the burn is relatively less. These are more local, you know, you must have heard vocal for local. So these are the organizations and enterprises because of which most of the infra could survive, most of the cities could survive, most of the regions could survive, especially in the COVID times. So this is another emerging area where everyone is looking at how we can make these small and medium enterprises into high growth businesses. Again, I'll talk about that a little in the presentation. So these are a few sectors, but having said that, Also, there are some emerging sectors. We recently launched a program, and in fact, before this program, we weren't very much conscious about looking at these areas as far as a program intervention is concerned. We did a landscape study on that. So this program is by Omidyar, and it really looks at the very, very niche areas and the areas that have really come up in the post-COVID times, if at all we can call these post-COVID. So it's like civic tech, which has to do anything with the citizens and making their lives easier, and looking at the relationship between the government and the citizens. I'll cite an example of a civic tech enterprise, Hak Darshak. So Hak Darshak talks to or assists people, especially who are small and medium enterprises or startups or artisans, about the government schemes and how they can avail these government schemes. So it's a connection between government and the people, because most of the time people wouldn't know what to apply for, what is applicable to them, what and how they can, and navigating the machinery, we know how difficult it is. So they help you navigate that, they help you assess it, they help you access it. So this is a good example of civic tech. Another emerging area, especially again after COVID hit us and tech was infused, and now the customer was also looking at new solutions and solutions in a newer way, which were more online or virtual rather than offline. These are in legal tech. So getting your complaints heard and resolved, not in an offline mode, but in an online mode. So something like online dispute resolution. So you don't go to courts, you don't go offline to offices, but you do these resolutions online. So this is something which is emerging in after COVID hit us, this came up. Same is with property tech. So of course, these are areas which are very niche, and I wouldn't say these are very, very hot selling areas as such, but these are emerging ones, especially civic tech, because again, it has a lot to do with smart city, smart village, smart community, public services, public health. So yes, civic tech is another, it's a very vast area, but it's another emerging sector. But again, coming back to your campuses where you are, and especially when you deal with the youth. So what are those solutions that we can look at? If it's a law school, definitely legal tech is a great area. And why the students should start working is because a traditional setup wouldn't allow a lot of innovations and interventions. It's going to be a routine court kacheri wali cheez. But when we look at these new students, new blood coming into these areas, then there is a lot of room for doing things differently. Secondly, university, this was just an example. This could even stand true for liberal arts, for any stream in engineering or management for that matter, or fashion, textile, or whatever, any stream. Second important thing and very interesting thing about the university campuses is the ability to cross-pollinate. So whenever an enterprise is funded or supported, when it is evaluated, one of the most important parameter to evaluate it is the team, the strength of the team, how balanced and diversified is the team. So if the team is pretty diverse, which means in terms of gender, which means in terms of expertise, which means in terms of skill sets, and anything, qualification, anything that you can think of. And it's a balanced team, that you have somebody from tech, you have somebody from that particular domain where you are making that intervention. There is somebody from, say, management or commerce or economics or liberal arts who can think, who can have design thinking put there. So a combination of all this really brings the best of all the worlds together. So when we look at the youth and universities, and especially AICs, as a part of the whole ecosystem, that's another one area. And also not to miss that we have a very robust system on our universities as far as research is concerned. So be it the physical labs, be it the faculty members who understand the nuances of these, this is another important strength that a startup can have, a youth startup can have, or a young startup can have, or a university startup can have. As far as area is concerned, anything that you anything that I'll be very happy to sort of keep answering, because let this not be one way. So please feel free to ask questions. So I'll come to that question, Rajni. So, you know, having that cross pollination, cross collaboration, having that strength of research and development, having that context of on the same campus, you have all faculty and facilities available. And now the new element of having the AICs in place, which would also help you have all kinds of business mentors, because business mentoring is very different from a domain mentoring. So while we'll have a domain mentoring on the campus, we need to have business mentoring from outside. So business coaching, business mentoring, what's happening around in the industry. So those collaborations, etc., really work very, very much in favor of the university campuses. So if you're looking at your own campus, look at your own department, not just as in isolation, but look at all the departments, how they can come together and how students get to sort of interact with each other, so that you get best of all the worlds that you have in your own little campus. How to develop ecosystem in my institute, because there is a lot of scope in this sector. Absolutely. Hotel management, unfortunately, in COVID times, there was a lot of pivot that was done by hotel industry startups. We know why, because it all fell apart because of no tourists, etc. But yes, how we are now looking at, again, not hotel management alone, but we are adding hotel to heritage, we are adding hotel to health, we are adding hotel to the culinary delights of the rest of the country, the real culinary delights that come from the extreme rural areas or remote areas of the country. We are connecting it to agri. We are connecting it to, say, Assam. So Assam will have its own delight, whether it is tea, whether it is any other aspect. So how all of this, and also interestingly, hotel is also now connecting itself to not just tourism, but also, and all kinds of tourism, sustainable tourism and green tourism and slum tourism and whatnot. It is also connecting itself to the tradition and the crafts of the country. So when you talk about, again, hotel management, don't look at hotel management. I'm sure you would not be doing that. But hotel management has connection with each and every department on the university campus. So whether it's fashion, so as a lot of tourism departments say now, you come to India, you take India a souvenir from here, which means a souvenir that will talk about the tradition, the culture of this country, that will talk about the crafts of this country. So instead of giving them plastic bottles, water bottles, clay bottles are given, or bamboo bottles are given, or copper bottles are given, that this is an artisan gift to you. You take my heritage, a piece of my heritage to you, to your country. So one thing for sure is, have a lot of design thinking workshops, and don't just have your department people there. Have people from all departments possible, all, whatever comes to your mind as to who can be. Sometimes the solution comes from a very, very remote area where you would not have expected anything coming from. So a lot of conversations and dialogues, a lot of design thinking around what are the problems that we look around, because the local problems, but looking at them in a global way. And of course, a lot of cross connection with the rest of the expertise that you have on the campus. I think a good starting point should be that, absolutely, yes, there is a lot of scope for that sector, as it is for any other sector. So with this, I'm just sharing my screen here so that we can maybe quickly look at some of the things that I thought I'll talk to you today about. I hope my screen is visible, is it? Can you give me a yes? I can't see the comment section at the moment. So can somebody unmute and say if the screen is visible? Great, thank you.
Ma'am.
Yes.
Thanks. So So let's understand what is a startup. We use this term very loosely. We have been doing businesses. I sit in the state of Rajasthan, Marwadi. A typical Marwadi is really good at business. So I could claim that we have been doing startups for ever now. But is a traditional business startup? Is a small and medium enterprise startup? What is a startup really? What does it really stand for? And so many times we use this as a substitute to an enterprise. But let's understand what a startup is and how it is different from any of the other counterparts or similar sounding terms in the market. So startup is typically a very, very temporary organization with a very, very specific objective. And the objective is to have such a business model in place, whichever problem statement it may be working towards, whichever sector it may be coming from, whichever region it may be coming from, whichever stage and kind of startup in the sense, who is the founder here? Is it a student? Is it a woman? Is it a man? Is it a corporate? Whatever it is. So it is a very temporary organization that really looks at having a business model which is repeatable and which is scalable. Now you would say, what is a business model? Again, a very loosely used term. What is a business model? We'll come to that. So when we say that we have a product, now here most of the times, again, we might look at this differently. We have a product and now we want to take it to the market. This is what a typical entrepreneur would do. You know, I have this product in my hand. I create this very well. I make beautiful craft, or I make amazing samosas, and let me now start selling. Or I am very, very fond of chai. So let me start a chai cup business, and I start my whatever business from one tapri. I make it 10 tapris. From one offline store, I make 10 craft offline stores, whatever. That is a typical traditional business. Now, just reverse the situation here. I'm looking at this solution. First of all, I'm looking at a problem. My problem is that there are a lot of artisans who are not getting right value for their product, for whatever they're making. So this is a problem statement on the artisan side. On the customer side, they pay value, as in they pay money, but they don't get authentic craft. So it's machine made, sold in the name of handmade, but the charges are of handmade, which are very high. Okay, this is a problem statement on the customer side, the market side. Now, can I offer a solution that works well to solve this problem? Okay, say whatever solution I have. Now I want to create, let's cite an example. I want to create an online store where I buy directly from the artisans. There is, for transparency, I have used some blockchain methodology. And now this goes to the customers, which are far and wide, domestic and international customers. They get authentic product directly from the artisans. They can customize it as per requirement. And now they know it for sure that there is a sale of authenticity on that. Whereas I make sure that my supply chain is very, very transparent. Each artisan would now know through an app, through a system, that when his or her product is sold, at what price, what are the market trends that are there in terms of colors, designs, what are the celebrities wearing, what is the international trend that is there, or that insight comes to the artisan through my network of my systems in place. And again, I'm using tech to deliver this, to gather this, analyze this, and transfer it to my artisan. So in this way, every new season or every year, I come up only with better products, better suited products for the market. And my customers every year come with repeated purchase and references to their friends that this is a great place to buy from. So I had a problem statement. I have a solution and an offering that marries very well problem with the statement. I have a problem solution fit and I have a great market fit. Okay, my offering, that's my product, and my market. So product market fit is also in place. Now I keep doing this. So my focus again is not on a product as in the tangible product. I don't look at how well I can design it. Okay, I'll give, instead of 10 days, I'll give it 20 days to make it more intricate, all of that. That's a very slow process that a startup is not really focused on that. A startup again would look at how you can make it more scalable. And scalability just wouldn't mean through volumes. It could also mean in terms of value. But how it can impact more and more and more and more people on the market side and also on the artisan side. So this is a typical startup methodology, which is also nothing but a design thinking methodology that a startup would use. They won't really start with a product in hand. I have this samosa in hand, now I want to sell it. No, I look around and see what is the problem statement that I want to work on. Okay, there are snacks here, but these are not Indian snacks. These are snacks here, but these are very, very, you know, not really working very well with the kind of people that are here. Or there are snacks, but they make you too full, they're too expensive, whatever that problem statement is. So you start with the problem statement and then you look at how you are connecting yourself well with the customers. And I especially take this slide so that when you are talking to your students, you know what it is really as a starting point. It's not the product that I have made, and now after making this product, I'm thinking where I force fit it in the market. Who should be the customer? I don't look for customers when my product is completely ready. First of all, considering customers is the first thing that I need to do. So I need to have two things in place: a problem statement and my who. For whom am I going to solve this problem? Who is having this problem? And can I understand this and empathize with that and define that? So I empathize with that through various circles and cycles of conversations to understand what is the problem statement, and then try and come back and define it. And then around that, ideate it. And then I go and prototype. I'll cite a very beautiful little story here. We had this enterprise, this startup that was, this founder was working for the visually impaired people. And he wanted to create a solution, a product that would allow this visually impaired person to understand what is happening around him, so that the mobility increases, the dependency reduces, and he or she can really understand what's around them. So whatever the solution was for him, here we did all those prototyping thing and everything. We understood. We thought we understood it completely, and now we could take it for the first time to the customer. Remember, we took it not when we had reached the perfect product. We were at a very, very building stage of it, but yes, a little beyond that. Now, when we took this product to the customer of the product, or the consumer of the product, he heard us, and the first question that he asked was, "What is the color of this product?" And we were taken aback because we had not even thought of it. We had not even thought of it. We, as in the startup, had not even thought of it. And this was the last thing on our mind, because how it looks like, what has a visually impaired person to do with how does a product look like? What is the color of the product? It's red, blue, green, black. How does it matter? You can't see that. And we literally asked him that, why should it matter to you that how it looks and what color is it? And the answer was, I can't see it, but I'm going to hold it and the others can see that. So it's really empathizing. It's a very small feature of the whole gamut of things, but yet an important feature. Important not from an entrepreneur's perspective, but from the customer's perspective. And this we would never know until we went to the customers, and not at the fag end of the product production, when we have so-called perfected the product, but at a very, very initial stage, in fact, right from the beginning of making that product. So that's a prototype. Then of course it was sent back to the lab. They were made whatever corrections, then sent back, then there was a feedback, then it was sent back. So it was a whole loop. It's generally a whole loop of experimentation. And now why this is important, because we don't want to make something which is costly, which has costed us in terms of the building of the whole process. And towards the end, we know. Sorry, is there a question? Okay, so we don't want to build it completely and then realize it is not working for our customers. We don't want to build it and then go to the customers and then say, please like it because we made it for you. We know, we think, we know, you all, that's not how a typical startup would work. Then of course you test it, you implement it, and you come back. And this process is not linear. This is a very circular process, and again and again, probably these cycles will have to be or will be required to be repeated. And that's also the reason a startup follows a very lean model. It doesn't have time to waste. It doesn't have resources to waste. And it's only going to look at problems and solutions in a way that it can help maximum number of people, which means it is repeatable, it is scalable. So that's how it as in a startup is different from a traditional enterprise, which wouldn't really look at how easily and fast can I replicate myself. But here, a startup is always told, a founder is always told that you need to fail fast. Don't work on not failing, work on failing fast. So that the whole process that we've just discussed, it happens in the fastest way possible. And you don't get to know when you are done with the product making that this product is not fit for the market and your customers have rejected it. So that is what the startup process looks like. And just a quick look at the business model. I'm not sure how many of you have already done this business model before, but this is one of the ways in which we figure out that, is my business model clear to me? Is this business model working for me? What do I need to do to make it work? So I just quickly take it because it's not really what we were supposed to discuss today, but just to have a good context of it so that when we continue discussing this and we take it to tomorrow's discussion, we know what we're talking about really. So on one hand, extreme on my right is the customer segment, which is my target customer. And on extreme, yeah.
Yeah, I think the slide is not moving. We are stuck with the slide number 1.
Can you see this colorful slide? Understand, materialize?
I don't know if others can see, but I am able to see only the first slide.
No, ma'am. Only first slide is visible.
God, okay, just give me a minute. I thought this is moving. Okay, let me try this again. Okay, I think I couldn't see the comments. I'm sorry, because I was on the presentation. Now, is it visible? Please tell me.
The title slide, yes.
Yeah, the title slide, yes. Okay.
Yes.
Is this visible?
Yes.
The colorful?
Okay.
Yes. I'm glad finally I could hear you. Okay. So this is the startup process that I was talking to you about. Apologies for that. I couldn't read the messages. Okay, so this is the typical startup model that we talk about, and it's very circular, it's lean, it's focused on fail fast, because we know we are not focusing on winning, we're focusing on finding the right solution. So we're not hooked to the solution, we are hooked to the problem statement. And whatever the problem statement requires, we would make those changes. This is how typically a business model canvas looks like. A lean model canvas looks like. And this is just one of the tools that you could use to figure out how your business model should be, is, and should become. So on my extreme right, you see the customer segments, and my extreme left, you see the problem statement. So when I look at the problems, I need to define the top 3 problems. And how do I define this top 3 problems is through asking my customers what the problem is. Now, there are a lot of experiments and a lot of studies that talk about the problem segment and the problem statement, and how the problem statement from the lens of customers becomes so important. So there was a study on McDonald's, and they have this milkshake, and they wanted to increase the price of the milkshake, and that was increase the sales of the milkshake. And that's when they went and asked their customers, what can we do to increase the sales so that you like the milkshake better? And the answers were random, you know, make it more crunchy, make it more viscous, make it more flavorful, etc., etc. And finally, there was this Harvard professor who was very much into corporate experimentation, was appointed for this. And when he looked at the problem, he and his team, they realized that most of these people who were buying these milkshakes from the MACD store that we were talking about, these were people who would just pick this up in the morning time between 9 and 7. They wouldn't eat anything along with that. They wouldn't even stay. It would be just like a takeaway for them. So then they got to understand, okay, the problem statement is not really for all the people who come across the day, because 80% of the milkshakes were being sold in the morning between 7 and 9. They started interviewing these people, and the questions they asked were like, why do you buy it? Which means, what is the problem that this milkshake is solving? It sounds like that. Or, what is a job that needs to be done? Later on, of course, it is also very famous as a job to be done thing. You could Google it up. It'll talk about the whole experiment, etc. So now they realized that these were the people who were going to office in the morning between 7 and 9. It was a long drive, and they wanted something to really pass time so that they don't fall asleep. It shouldn't be so heavy that it keeps them too much full. It shouldn't be so light that it just makes them feel hungry as soon as they reach office. And the straw there is very interesting, that it's very viscous, so it takes them almost 1.5 hours to finish that little mug of or cup of milkshake, and it would fit in so well in the cup holder that's there in their car. So all this, and again, they wouldn't use 2 hands for it, you know, like they also tried bananas and sneakers and beagles and all sorts of things. And they said it wasn't really cumbersome for them to have this, because just one hand and one hand could be on the wheel, and they could maybe, you know, continue driving and all of that. So here the job to be done for the milkshake was not really to give them any healthy drink to have, any very, very, very tasty thing. Of course, that was one of the factors, but not really very tasty. They were not looking at really new flavors or make it more crunchy, whatever. There was a job to be done. So sometimes we think that what is the problem that a milkshake can solve, probably? And the obvious answer would be health, right? So again, the intention here is that how a problem statement is now being looked at from a customer's perspective, and not the perspective that probably we would have, or the obvious perspective that we would have. Then we look at what could be the probable solutions. And when we look at solutions, we don't look at it in terms of perfect product. We look at it from what should be the top 3 features that this product should have in order to fit in that problem solution statement that we have in front of us. And then, of course, we keep revising it as and when, with each cycle of our design thinking and taking it to the people, we keep designing it. One very important thing that a startup would have, whether it's a student startup, any startup, is a unique value proposition. If I'm doing something which is already being done in the market, then what am I doing? Then I'm not required to do that. So what is that clear, straight message, that clear state innovation, that clear state proposition, value proposition that I am offering through my solution. If I can pronounce that and if I have that, it would help me differentiate from the rest of the market for the customers and also for the investors and also for an incubator and for anybody for that matter. Also, if I have this unique value proposition, I know that my competitors probably may not be doing something, but I'm doing this. Or this is the reason why I can have better collaborations because this is my USP or this is my unique value proposition, but your unique value proposition is very different. For example, we have a Pizza Hut and Domino's, both would sell pizzas, but their unique value proposition is really different. So Domino's would say that we will get this pizza for you in 30 minutes, whereas Pizza Hut would say, we sell these, you come to our place and we will dine you, we'll give you that experience. The price, the customer segment, everything is very different and they coexist because the unique value propositions are very different. Same could be for Starbucks versus, say a cafe coffee day or so many that have come up. So a Starbucks would give you an experience. That's the value that it would charge. It will really treat you as a VIP. Whereas others may have a different value proposition. The next, if at all, we can have an unfair advantage. For example, if a startup is in Assam, which is very rich in natural resources, really heavily endowed with natural resources, say tea, versus this entrepreneur who is working on tea but is in Rajasthan, who will have to get this tea from, say, Assam. So of course, the availability of tea in the vicinity would reduce cost for somebody who's sitting in Assam. So that's my unfair advantage. I haven't done really anything to earn it, but you can't have it because you're not around or you're not here. I am here. Somebody in Rajasthan may not have that unfair advantage. So anything that others cannot have by default, if you could find something of that kind and work on that, that really positions you heavily, but more importantly, your unique value proposition. Then your key matrix, because every time we move towards a goal, we need to have what we expect from this goal or this exercise rather. So what are going to be my matrices of success when and how can I measure? Because see, startup will not stay forever. It will not get nourished by incubators and the ecosystem forever unless it's producing results and it's moving from one stage to the other. And that's how a startup moves. The journey of a startup is, firstly, most of them are bootstrapped. They take money from their friends and family. They gone are the days when they would work in garages. Many of them would still work in garages, but now they're co-working spaces. They would book one seat or they would work from home, wherever. And then they gradually move to a prototype stage, from an idea stage. From there, they would move to an MVP stage. From there to an early stage startup with early revenue and early traction. Then a revenue stage, growth stage. And that's how the investors would also change, because the risk becomes all the more limited and the ROI, the return on investment, increases with time if they have been tested through this whole time period. So all that transition would now also reflect in the key matrix that we make for our work as an entrepreneur, as a startup founder. And then the channels. So what are the channels? In COVID times, we really saw that most of the entrepreneurs were moving from a B2B or a B2G, which is business to business or business to government, to B2C model. That was the easiest and the only viable and feasible model. Most of them turned from an offline to an online mode because, again, that was the only option available. So channel is nothing but how I reach to my customers. What is the channel through which I reach? How this is taken. The proposition is taken to my customer. And of course, needless to say that there are two aspects, the revenue and the cost, which needs to be kept in mind. As far as startup is concerned, the cost really has to be minimum. The value that a customer gives you back in terms of lifetime value as against the acquisition cost for that customer, which is marketing cost, really needs to be very high. So how we are seeing that the lifetime value is high, how we see that gross profits could be maximized, how we see that we build technology once, but then that's leveraged across the period of time. And that's a beauty of having technology infused, because you take some time to build it. But then when you start scaling up, the marginal costs they would diminish. So that would really help, and of course leading to the average costs reducing. So the profit margins would ultimately increase. And what are your revenue streams? A lot of entrepreneurs would say we have 5-6 revenue streams, we have 5-6 customers, we have 5-6 channels, etc. But also that work of the startup is to find its niche, find its core, and find its focus. That's very important again, because a startup doesn't have forever to work. It's here to stay for some time to prove its point, not in terms of product, again I emphasize, in terms of business model that's scalable, repeatable, impactful. And when I say impact not just in a limited way, but any and every kind of impact that you can think of. So whenever you're talking to your students or entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, please make sure that innovation, tech infusion, scalability, what position, what is the problem statement for that matter you're solving, and what is the very much clarity on who is my customer, where is the customer, am I on the same page with my customer, am I striking those conversations with the customer, etc. All of this is in place, because if this is not in place, then probably we have a lame understanding of what a startup should do or what a startup is. And then when we reach out to the people for help from the ecosystem, probably we'll not be able to have that. And in all this, a lot of people would help you as part of the ecosystem. So what is a startup ecosystem, or how would we define a startup ecosystem? So it's an environment. It is tangible, intangible. It's a person specific, it's a non-person specific, it's an organization specific and non-organization specific. It's direct and indirect. It's active and passive. I mean, I can use a lot of adjectives here, but here it's a congenial environment, a favorable environment for a startup to start and for a startup to flourish. And not just one startup, because if I look at a startup in isolation, I say, okay, I'm only going to work on this customer who wants great crafts, and I have no empathy for the artisan, which is going to be my value chain, or any kind of a small or medium enterprise, or any kind of an influencer market, influencer in the market that has to do anything with my product, or any kind of tech infusion, any kind of innovation, any kind of research and development, which is actually the value chain for me. I don't care for that, and my startup ecosystem also doesn't care for that, then it won't work. So it's not just a startup anymore. It's also the value chain of the startup. And that's where, probably coming back to the question where to start, the easiest to start is from the low-hanging fruit. And the low-hanging fruit is that, okay, what all sectors are really doing well at the moment? Health is doing well at the moment. In fact, now there are special accelerators on how to dispose of the waste that was created during COVID. Needless to say, how much of waste was there. PPE kits were there, which were just thrown in the landfills. Then the masks are there. Bottles of disinfectants and whatnot is there. So one is that, again, look around at the problem statement that is there, the problem opportunity that's there, not opportunity, but the problem opportunity, the challenges that are there. And then look at the whole value chain of it, and then see, okay, now this is a place where I can work, where I have an offering that would probably make sense. And then I go to my customers, my probable customers, who could be my early adopters, and then understand from them whether that's working for them, not working for them. Here, just one example of how this value chain could look like. This is typically for a craft segment, but it could be for any other sector for that matter. It would just vary to a certain extent. As far as craft is concerned, so whenever we look at any program intervention, we look at these 3-4 layers. One is the maker, which is at the bottom of the pyramid. This person is, or this individual is really the maker, the what do you say? The raw material is brought in here, the skill set is brought in here, the traditional knowledge is brought in here, and this artisan would make this raw material into something which is amazingly beautiful. Now here you must have seen that there are a lot of interventions from the government side, whether it's in terms of direct artisan intervention, or this could be in the form of self-help groups, or this could be in terms of cluster development or training and development, uh, majorly being done by NSDCs of the world. So these are really the makers. Now, this is not a place where we would probably directly look at having entrepreneurs. Yes, some of them are now, especially second generation of the master weavers, probably may look at entrepreneurship. But again, the second layer is these are the collectives, and especially the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises. These are the enterprises which may have a traditional business, but still they form a very important part of the craft value chain. The whole objective of putting this graph in front of you is to help you understand that if we just look at the startup, of course, as an individual, I may not be able to do much about the whole ecosystem, but we all may have our little contributions to make. And that is also the reason AICs are made. It's not just a startup, because if you build a startup alone, then after some time, you would start falling short of the nourishment. But one good amount of focus also needs to be on the local partnerships, on the collaborations, on building the local ecosystems, be it investors, facilitators, mentors, coaches, researchers, fellows, volunteers, citizens, etc., and the smaller businesses. Now, SMEs have a very, very important role to play in this whole value chain, especially for the startups who are sitting at the top. The reason is that these would be in very, very close contact with the makers. They are the real frontliners. They may be doing small businesses, but these are effective businesses. And they become, again, a very important part of any kind of dissemination in terms of technology, in terms of design, in terms of information, in terms of policy changes, etc., for the makers. From here, we move to the high growth businesses. These are typical businesses who are really at the cusp of SMEs and high tech businesses, because these people would have a very great clarity on their business models and a very well pronounced innovations. So they may not be really very, very tech deep startups, but these startups are really, or these enterprises are really the ones now that they have understood that this is a clear business model, a validated business model. This is working. This may not be as scalable as probably the top layer would be, but still it is investable to a great extent. But yes, it will definitely have some traits from the previous layer, which is a small and medium enterprise. So it's really between that. Yet they become a very, very important part again of the value chain, because these are now again very, very receptive to any kind of new thing that comes to the market, tech adoption to the market. And there would be solutions based on their requirements also. So there will be a lot of tech startups at the top that would probably also be catering to the needs of the high growth businesses. And of course, then we have the typical tech businesses and tech enabled startups of the world, which will have innovation, a clear business model, a very scalable, investable, repeatable, impactful model. And that's where, and of course, the good part of the value chain, sometimes we tend to forget, is also on the front side, on the customers. And the best example is coming from COVID, because market has been never so fertile from customers' perspective to see that they have become so receptive either to use of technology, which probably we would have achieved in 3 to 4 years. We have achieved that kind of tech adoption in the 6 to 9 months of COVID. Any spectrum, any line, any value chain, any layer of the market, you see. Secondly, the customer awareness on what I am eating, what I am drinking, what I am consuming, where is it going, how is it being disposed of, what is the environmental impact of this, etc. So now it also becomes a demand pull kind of an innovation that gets into the market instead of just a supply push. Just to give you a glimpse of what probably could include a startup ecosystem, I'll start with universities, because that's exactly where we stand today. So universities, in a very, very historical way, they did not really cherished that kind of a status. But now, which is for the last 5-6 years, especially with AICs coming in, especially with the internet revolution that has happened, and now students, faculty members, anyone on the campus has complete exposure of what's happening around the world, what kind of innovations are happening. So we're not really living in the small bubble. But having said that, the virtual world is one thing. And that's why it becomes, a few places become more aspirational. A Bangalore, say, becomes more aspirational. A Delhi becomes more aspirational. So on, or Hyderabad becomes more aspirational. But when it comes to the real world that's around us, which is on the university campuses, that's a core. Then the geography around it and the other universities and organizations and incubators that are around in the city, in the district, they become really, really important. So again, please don't look at what's happening only on the university. There's so much that can be done on the campus, because again, we're not just looking at one department, but we are looking at the whole ecosystem, again, the ecosystem approach. And here the role of faculty members and research scholars and anything to do with facilitating the students becomes really, really an important term, because they will also need to be well acquainted with what's happening, what these terms really mean, what they stand for, what is required in the market. Funding is just one piece, that's important. But before funding, it's like before investment, what's important is investability. So if we have investability, if we have a strong business model, if we have really worked on the local ecosystem, and also connected to the larger ecosystem across the world. Now people are very open, given things are online. Everybody's so open to collaborating. Then we have large corporations. So there are a few incubators whose business model is to run accelerators and hackathons for these larger corporations. So larger corporations are like big elephants, white elephants. They would have their structures and infrastructure and cost in place. Any kind of experimentation would cost them a lot. Whereas for a startup, it is going to be just like quick and easy, lean, with very less cost and fast. So these larger corporations also rely a lot of times on these smaller enterprises, or rather startups, to get their innovations done, to get their experiments done. And sometimes if there is already some kind of a great validation on the ground, they would acquire it or acqui-hire it, which means you just don't acquire the solution, but you also acquire the team. There are mergers you must have seen. And besides that, there are intrapreneurs. I am sure we've all heard of Google, how much it encourages a culture of innovation in the organization itself. So some time is really set aside for you to think, for you to look at the problems around, look at the solutions around. There are a lot of support organizations, again, which includes any kind of incubator that is around, AIC or TBI, which is technology business incubators like ours. It could be at the state level or the central level, all of that. So they have a very important role in terms of figuring out or having these entrepreneurs and startups early. They spot on early, because these are very much located on the ground. As we saw, there are certain incubators that probably would work at a higher level, at a central level. Whereas there are a lot of incubators that would work at a regional level and would look at the regional innovation, would look at the regional ecosystem again. So for example, for us, if it's 60% of the work on startups, it's 40% work on the startup ecosystem. Also because the startup ecosystem building piece doesn't happen in a matter of 6 months. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of external factors to also chip in. So that's a very, very fundamental infrastructural change, soft and hard infrastructural change that's required. Then research organizations, needless to say, whether it's landscaping, whether it's understanding if this is a new area, say a property tech is a new area, which was majorly governed by government. Most of the same as say with legal tech. It's law. Most of these documents, 99% of the documents, in fact, are not even digitized. So what are the interventions there? We don't have the data. We don't have a startup control. We don't have access. So how these research organizations now are playing an important role in understanding a sector, landscape study of that sector, problem statement and banks for these sectors, as in what is a problem bank? Why are startups not being able to intervene here? What are the startups that have been able to succeed? What is the funding scenario that looks like? Another important is service providers. This is a very, very important aspect when it comes to marketing, when it comes to any kind of legal expertise required, or finance requirement, or requirement on, say, patents. You want to have patents for your product, intellectual property rights for your product, so on and so forth. These service providers, and of late a very new model that's emerging in the market for incubators is that they work in close association with these service providers. For example, we keep telling our entrepreneurs that you really need to have your customer data in place. A CRM really needs to be in place. But to be able to create a new CRM for each and every startup is difficult. So the collaboration, say, with Zoho, has worked well for us. And these service providers are happy to do this. So Zoho gives you, say, a 1 year of a holiday wherein you don't really have to pay anything. You just acquire and get acquainted to the product, to the platform. And from there, you start paying in the second year. Similarly, if there is any payment gateway that's required, so then there is a collaboration with, say, a Razorpay. So again, these kind of service providers really help in acquiring the right kind of tools and solutions which are available for this kind of whichever sector the startup may be working in. And then the funding organizations. When we look at funding organizations, one definitely is a government. It's a government, and the ministries and the departments do have a lot of options there as far as funding is concerned. And this kind of funding is typically very good for universities. It's very good for idea stage enterprises or startups. It's very good for early stage enterprises. Later on, when the risk has been mitigated and the ROI has gone up, that's a time when people would look at more from the VC's perspective. So then there'll be a lot of VCs who would be waiting there to help you with funds and their expertise. The third element here is the angel network, which is again a typical ecosystem thing. There are local angel networks. There are also angel networks at the center, like India Angel Network, IAN. Many of you would have heard about that. And then there are local angel networks. So angels generally come into the picture for two reasons. One, they're very attached to their particular region, and that's the reason they want to encourage any kind of ecosystem building and startup activity. And second is, many times when we're looking at social impact in the areas where a market has failed, when I say social impact, I don't really mean NGOs, because we're talking about startup. That's also a difference between startup and NGO. A social impact startup and an NGO. NGO is still a Section 8 company, whereas startup, social impact startup really balances itself with both commercial and impact values. So this is a for-profit private limited company, which is also looking at the commercial viability, whereas also the social viability and social impact. And so these are the funding organizations. So all this and plus, is what would make your startup ecosystem. And of course, you need ideas, interventions, research. You need startups at various stages. Of course, startups and entrepreneurs, needless to say, they are definitely very, very centric here. We can't underestimate the I've also mentioned that initially, the team, the balance of the team, the strength of the team. Because imagine at an idea stage and at a very early stage where there is no enough commercial validation on the ground, what are you going to bet on? You're going to bet on the team strength, their understanding. So that's really important. That's the reason I say on the university campuses, please encourage cross-pollination amongst the various departments that are there. That is not only going to build that intra-university ecosystem, startup ecosystem, and a very fertile ground for future. It's a free flow of information and dialogue and ideas and solutions that happen across the spectrum of whatever is there on the university. Another important is mentors and advisors and experts. So these are typical mentors who would advise you on a specific function, which could be, say, marketing or finance or operations or supply chain or whatever. There is another set of mentors who would advise you or consult on the strategy bit, how to look at the market, how to look at the leanness, how to scale it up, what are the channels one could look at, so on and so forth. These become very important because, and some of these mentors are also advisors, full-time advisors on the startup or even on the incubator board, formal or informal, because these would bring in loads of information and loads of knowledge and loads of collaboration and network from the rest of the ecosystem. And that's really important because exposure again is very important. So any incubator, any department needs to have collaboration with the people who are in the industry, who are in the startup ecosystem, because that is a continuous engagement, and it's not a point in time events. It's like a continuous dialogue, a continuous exposure, and that's the reason a lot of people have also started this entrepreneur in residence, because it's not a one-time activity, it's a regular conversation that happens. It's a mindset change, it's an approach, it's an appetite that really needs to be increased. Anybody who is entrepreneurial, and I would mention this very specifically, that a lot of faculty members are very entrepreneurial in nature. They would also have a great role to play here. And typically these faculty members are usually made up out of e-cells or placement cells or AICs, or they are working, for example, for us as CI Code, a lot of MA professors who work closely with us. So this is a perfect blend of academia and the practical startup world, again bringing in best of the two worlds together. And anybody who's related to the organization, from the grant making people, the donors, to the stakeholders, other stakeholders, and how you can bring in more and more layers to this, including how can parents be a part of it, because a lot of times the parents would also create that pressure that you have to take up placements, all of that. But if there is enough environment there which is very open, which talks freely about experimentation and looking at entrepreneurship as a serious alternative or a serious option, and also help us, we in fact help them mitigate the risks, whether it could be through an EIR arrangement or a funding arrangement, or a regular training across the 2, 3, 4 years that the students are on the campus. The projects that we do with them, most of our departments and even the research, PhD research bit, but otherwise the projects that we do, most of the departments will have this in, especially the final year. It's very important to have these projects have some element of entrepreneurship, if at all it can. So we've seen a lot of entrepreneurs or startups coming in from these universities, these campuses, wherein they have converted their project into a startup solution or a startup. So what can be better than this? They come in early, they start early, they learn early, and I think it's a great win-win situation to be in. I'll quickly take the last piece of today's discussion, and I'm sorry I've not been looking at any questions if there are there. Lifetime value, okay, sorry. Okay, lifetime value, there is a question here, lifetime value. So lifetime value of a customer is really, see, when we acquire a customer doesn't know about what we're doing. So we need to spend some money to be able to shout out loud to the customer, to the right customer, as to we exist. Our solution is there for you to try, and we're there to help you out. So that is the customer acquisition cost. It could include the paid marketing that you do, say, on the social media handles. It could include the meetings that the business meetings that you do. It also includes the people that you employ to do your BD, business development, so on and so forth. So this is the cost that you are incurring in acquiring the customers, right? On the other hand, if this customer comes to you and just buys one time and goes away, which means the cost that you had incurred on acquiring this customer versus the value that the customer brings back to you, there is a huge amount of difference, and the cost is greater than the value that the customer has given you. You're incurring losses, absolute losses. So the idea here is to acquire those customers who will have a higher lifetime value. That means there are more repeat purchases. That person in, say, and now this lifetime could be defined for different startups and different customers differently. So say if for one startup, it is the lifetime is the next 10 years for the customer engagement with me. How much does that customer buy from me? How many times does that customer buy from me? So that is the lifetime value versus the amount of money I spent on acquiring that. So if I have a more word of mouth, which means my cost is less to acquire. If I have more repeat purchases, I have longer or bigger lifetime value. So that's a difference. And when it comes to it, it's very important also for a startup to understand what is the unit economics. Unit economics is really coming back to that one unit of sales that you do, one customer. You can define your unit in whatever way. So here, when we talk about lifetime value, we are defining it as one customer. So how much does one customer bring in? You know, is it just minus 50 rupees? Is it plus 5,000 rupees? My favorite customer would be wherein I have to invest less and I have more value coming in from him.
Pallavi ma'am?
Yep.
Munna Kumar has asked a question, what is lifetime value? Please explain to him.
Yeah, that's what I was explaining, Prabhatji. That lifetime value is really the amount of value in terms of monetary value that a customer would give me for whatever services or products or offerings that that person would buy from me, versus a cost that I have to acquire, I have to incur to acquire, right? So if Prabhatji has to buy from me, say, apparels. So I would say, okay, the kind of apparels I make, Prabhatji would use it only till the time he's in service, because those are typical office wears. So say Prabhatji has more 15 years to go. So can I acquire this customer for the next 15 years? How much of money will I have to spend to acquire Prabhatji, to convince him to be able to buy from me? Plus how many times and what value of goods he will buy from my company or my startup. That is going to be the, so say Prabhatji buys in his 15 years time, lifetime, with me as a customer, he buys say 15 times. Every year he would buy once, and every time he would buy say roughly product say worth 5,000. So 5,000 multiplied by 15 is my lifetime value for this customer. That's how. What is the fee for registering a startup as private limited, and how, where do you register a private limited company? The easiest way is please hire a CA. There is some fees that's required, and more than the fees, there are compliances that come with private limited company. And in case you've just started your company and you don't have funding agencies ready to write checks to you, you don't have to really care to convert it into a private limited company. Wait till the time. So many of these enterprises or startups would really wait for a time wherein they have got some validation, or they have a funder, they have an investor, you know. Because why I say investor, because investor would ask equity. The investor would ask for equity, and equity you can transfer only when you are a registered private limited company. So get in touch. There is some amount of fees, 15, 20,000, whatever the fees is there. But there are compliances. For example, every year you will have to have board meeting, etc. So that's important thing that comes with us with registering a company. Just quickly going through, I think we are
Is there
following.
any incentive for startup, madam? Is there any incentive for the entrepreneur to start up?
Yes. If you are registered on Startup India, or if you are an MSME, you're registered on MSME, there are some indirect benefits. Like Startup India, there are benefits. If you're registered, there are certain schemes, there are funding schemes for you that you can avail benefit of. There are no major benefits. See, whenever it comes to money, you can't have money in your account unless you are a registered organization, right? Because the money wouldn't come to, say, Dr. Katian, right?
Yes.
Katian, right? It will come to the account of the company, right? So that's a time when you will invariably have to have the company in place, or a formal entity, a registered entity in place. And yes, there are certain benefits. For example, the Startup India schemes would be only applicable to startups that have been built across the last 10 to 12 years. I think earlier it was 10 years. So any startup that is, or any enterprise or company that is 10 years old, older than 10 years, may not be really considered as startup, right? So if you are born only in the last 10 years, will you be considered as a startup? Otherwise, you're not a startup. Either you get into the category of established company, or you get into the category of an SME if you've not grown that well. Okay, so there are certain schemes that will be applicable to you, but it will all really depend on which sector you come from, how much technology you use, so on and so forth. I think if running short.
Madam, I think
Yeah.
certain organizations are providing that seed capital and subsidies to startups, madam.
Yes.
They are conducting a coherent programs. IIT Madras and ICMR.
Yes.
They are conducting in October and 7 weeks, 4 weeks or 6 weeks programs. After that, they are providing 5 lakhs and 25 lakhs capitals, seed capital.
Right. One also good thing, when you register yourself on the Startup India portal, any kind of a scheme that's getting introduced, you will get a notification on that because you would be on the mailer list for them. So I think that's a benefit on that. But otherwise, I think if you are a startup and registered as a private limited company, the incubators would definitely be able to help you. The investors would definitely be able to help you. And if the solution is great, then I think the assistance is going to come from all the sides. I think rest we might want to look at it tomorrow because we're already at 11:32. Prabhatji, what do you say?
Yeah, ma'am, definitely.
Sure.
Fortunately, we have your
Thank you,
session
madam.
tomorrow as well.
Thank you.
So my request is to participants that please have some questions prepared with you because she is coming tomorrow as well. So you can ask her
Sure.
as many questions as you wish.
Sure.
And she is right person to answer you as she is a practitioner. Being practitioner, she is really right person to answer your questions very well.
Great. So great. I think this was useful to whatever little extent, but you would take something from this session. And the whole idea is, you're sitting on that fertile ground that's called university, and universities have a great deal of role to play in making or breaking the startup ecosystem. So whatever assistance probably the incubators can give you, the ecosystem can give you, we'll be happy to give that, offer that, but you really will have to, you have a very important role to play. And I think it's really important for you to understand that you have a very important role to play and you start playing that. So wish you all the best and hope to see you tomorrow.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
There is a break and we will start next session at 12. Be on time, please. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ji. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.